Natalie Wood didn't just drown, she died under circumstances so chilling that, even after 4 decades, the truth remains tangled in secrecy and suspicion. A woman terrified of water somehow fell from her yacht in the middle of the night. Bruises covered her body, no one heard her scream, and the only people on board, her husband, Robert Wagner, Hollywood star Christopher Walken, and the yacht's captain. For years, Wagner dodged the hard questions, but at 93 he's speaking out. Is this finally the confession the world has been waiting for, or just another attempt to rewrite history? The truth may be closer than ever, but will it ever set him free? To understand why this case remains so controversial, we must go back to the beginning. Hollywood has always been a place where talent and charm can turn a struggling actor into a legend. Robert Wagner knew that better than anyone. With his chiseled looks and undeniable charisma, he quickly became one of the industry's most sought-after leading men. From the golden era of classic films to television dominance in later years, Wagner built a career that made him a household name. But while the world saw the dashing star, behind the scenes his life was deeply intertwined with one woman, Natalie Wood. Their love story was the kind that Hollywood dreams are made of. In 1957, Wagner and Wood shocked the world with their whirlwind romance. She was barely 19, an actress adored by millions, and he was the suave heartthrob that every woman wanted. The media couldn't get enough of them, dubbing them the perfect couple. They walked down the aisle in a fairy tale wedding, and for a while it seemed like the happily ever ever was real. But as cameras flashed and headlines swooned over them, cracks were already forming behind closed doors. By 1962, it was over. Their divorce stunned fans, but those close to them weren't surprised. Hollywood was a pressure cooker of egos, schedules, and temptations. There were whispers of infidelity, jealousy, and explosive fights. Wood, already battling the weight of superstardom, struggled with the marriage's demands. Wagner, despite his charm, was not immune to the chaos of fame. Their once passionate love had burned too fast, and in the end, they walked away, seemingly for good. But fate had other plans. In 1972, after years apart, Wagner and Wood found themselves drawn back to each other. Older, wiser, and longing for stability, they did what most divorced couples never do. They got married again. This time, they vowed to make it last. Their second marriage was different. They had a blended family, with Natalie's daughter from her previous marriage and the daughter they shared. Wood, once consumed by Hollywood's relentless demands, seemed eager to embrace family life. Wagner, despite his still thriving career, appeared devoted to her. In his memoir, Wagner described their relationship as something rare and irreplaceable. He painted a picture of deep love, respect, and an unbreakable bond. He spoke about how Natalie made an imprint on his soul, how she was the one constant in his life. But memoirs are written with careful hands. The truth, the full truth, was far more complex. Their relationship was not without struggles. They fought, they reconciled, and they carried the baggage of their past into their second marriage. They had it all, the fame, the wealth, the love that had survived a painful breakup, but Hollywood's golden couple was about to face a tragedy so dark that it would haunt Robert Wagner for the rest of his life. But their love story took a tragic turn one fateful night in 1981. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, a night of luxury aboard the Splendor, a yacht that had hosted countless moments of glamour and celebration. But on the evening of November 28, 1981, that illusion shattered. By morning, Natalie Wood was dead, her lifeless body floating in the Pacific near Catalina Island. The details of what happened that night remain one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries. On board the yacht were Robert Wagner, Natalie Wood, Christopher Walken, and Captain Dennis Davern. Natalie and Walken, her co-star in Brainstorm, had formed a close friendship. Wagner, known for his charm, had always been a man in control, but that night, tensions boiled over. According to reports, Wagner and Walken had a heated argument. Witnesses on nearby boats later claimed they heard shouting from the Splendor. Some described it as a fight between a man and a woman. Others suggested it was between Wagner and Walken. What exactly was said, that remains unclear. What we do know is that Wagner was reportedly furious about how much time Natalie and Walken were spending together. Was it simple jealousy, or was there something deeper at play? As the night progressed, the mood darkened. Then, just like that, Natalie was gone. At first, the story seemed straightforward. Wagner and Davern claimed that Natalie had taken the yacht's small dinghy to shore, a bizarre decision for someone who had a well-documented fear of deep water. The official ruling? Accidental drowning. The world mourned, but the whispers never stopped. Then came the inconsistencies. Captain Dennis Davern later admitted he had lied to authorities under Wagner's orders. He claimed Wagner delayed the search for Natalie, downplayed the argument, and acted strangely that night. Davern's admission changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just a tragic accident, it was a mystery filled with secrecy, conflicting stories, and missing pieces. There were bruises on Natalie's body, marks that didn't match the theory of a simple fall. Neighbors on a nearby boat swore they heard a woman's voice screaming for help, but no one came. And when authorities reclassified the case in 2011, listing Wagner as a person of interest, the world took notice. So what happened? Did Natalie slip, drunk and unsteady, into the dark abyss? Or was there something more sinister, something that's been covered up for decades? The case seemed closed at first, but questions never stopped arising. In the days following Natalie Wood's death, Robert Wagner played the role of the devastated husband. His grief was on full display, his eyes red, his voice breaking as he spoke of the love he lost. The world mourned with him. Hollywood icons paid tribute, the media painted a picture of a tragic accident, and for a time, it seemed that was the end of the story. But something didn't sit right. When the police closed the case in 1981, the official report labeled Natalie's death as an accidental drowning. There were no criminal charges, no deeper investigation, and no lingering questions, at least. Not officially. But behind the scenes, theories were already circulating. Some believed Wagner's jealousy over Natalie's friendship with Christopher Walken had turned violent that night. Others speculated that Wagner, angry and intoxicated, had confronted Natalie, leading to a struggle that ended with her in the water. Some even suggested a cover-up, hinting that Hollywood's elite had shielded Wagner from legal consequences. For decades, the case remained closed, but suspicions never faded. Then, in 2011, everything changed. Los Angeles authorities reopened the investigation, citing new information from Captain Dennis Davern, who had recanted his original statement. He now claimed Wagner was involved in Natalie's disappearance, admitting that he had been pressured to lie. Davern stated that after a heated argument between Wagner and Walken, Natalie was nowhere to be found, and Wagner delayed the search for hours. These statements shattered the long-accepted narrative. As forensic experts reviewed the autopsy again, they made a shocking discovery. Natalie's body had bruises inconsistent with an accident. The new findings suggested possible foul play. Witnesses from nearby boats came forward years later, insisting they had heard a woman screaming for help. Why hadn't these details been taken seriously before? Then came the biggest bombshell of all. In 2018, Robert Wagner was officially named a person of interest. This was no longer a mere tragic accident. Law enforcement now believed Wagner might have been involved. But the case had been cold for too long. With no new physical evidence and too many unanswered questions, no charges were ever filed. Wagner, now in his 90s, continued to deny any wrongdoing, maintaining that he had nothing to do with his wife's death. So why did it take nearly 40 years for the police to reconsider Wagner's involvement? Was it just new witness statements, or was the pressure from the public too overwhelming to ignore? Whatever the reason, the case had changed forever. The once grieving husband now stood at the center of a decades-old mystery, his name forever linked to a tragedy he couldn't escape. But Wagner remained largely silent on the case, focusing instead on his career and memoirs. For decades, Robert Wagner avoided talking about the night Natalie Wood died. Whenever the subject came up, he dismissed it as a painful tragedy, a wound too deep to reopen. But in 2016, he released his memoir, I Loved Her in the Movies, a book that promised to take readers through Hollywood's golden age and the iconic women who shaped it. Buried within its pages were subtle hints, brief mentions of Natalie Wood, and carefully worded reflections that revealed more of what they didn't say than what they did. Wagner described Natalie with admiration, speaking of her beauty, charm, and talent. He wrote about how she left an imprint on him, how she was one of the greatest loves of his life. He painted their love story as one of passion and fate, acknowledging their first failed marriage and celebrating their second chance together. But when it came to the night of her death, silence. Despite decades of speculation, Wagner refused to dive into the details of what happened on the Splendor. He never addressed the bruises on her body, the conflicting witness statements, or why he was now considered a person of interest. Instead, he offered nostalgia without controversy, reflecting on the past in a way that felt more like careful curation than raw honesty. This wasn't the first time Wagner had written about Natalie. In his 2008 memoir, Pieces of My Heart, he claimed that her death was a cruel accident and insisted he had no involvement. But as investigators reopened the case years later, critics began to question the omissions in his storytelling. Was Wagner avoiding the truth, hoping to quietly rewrite history? Or was this simply a man trying to move forward, refusing to relive the night that would forever define him? Some saw his memoirs as an attempt at closure, a way to preserve Natalie's memory without focusing on the controversy. Others saw them as deliberate deflections, proof that there were still secrets he refused to share. While Wagner chose his words carefully, others were far less hesitant. Natalie's daughter, Natasha Gregson Wagner, had her version of events. And when she finally spoke, her words surprised everyone. While Wagner stayed quiet, others spoke out, including Natalie's daughter. For decades, the world speculated about Robert Wagner's involvement in Natalie Wood's death. But in 2020, someone unexpectedly stepped forward to defend him, Natalie's daughter, Natasha Gregson Wagner. In a move that shocked many, she released the HBO documentary Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind, a deeply personal look at her mother's life, career, and the tragedy that defined her legacy. But the most surprising part? Robert Wagner was in it. Despite the controversy surrounding her mother's death, Natasha publicly praised Wagner, calling him a loving father figure who raised her after Natalie's passing. She even referred to him as one of the great loves of her life, a statement that left many questioning whether she truly believed his innocence or if she was simply trying to protect the only father she had ever known. Wagner's decision to participate in the documentary was highly unusual. For years, he had refused to discuss the details of Natalie's final night. But here, on camera, he sat with Natasha and reflected on their shared grief. He insisted he had nothing to do with her death, describing the tragedy as an unbearable loss that haunted him for decades. To some, this was a rare moment of vulnerability. To others, it was a carefully calculated move to control the narrative. The public reaction was deeply divided. Supporters saw a heartbroken man finally opening up about the love of his life. Skeptics saw a desperate attempt to clear his name. Many questioned why Natasha had chosen to stand by him so publicly, given that the case had been reopened and Wagner was now considered a person of interest. Was this loyalty? Denial? Or a family's final attempt to put the past behind them? Natasha's support for Wagner didn't start with the documentary. In 2016, she co-wrote Natalie Wood, Reflections on a Legendary Life, a book filled with rare family photos and personal essays. It painted a picture of Natalie as a loving mother, a Hollywood icon, and a woman who struggled with the pressures of fame. It was a touching tribute, but some noted what was missing: a deep dive into the circumstances of her death. Like Wagner's memoirs, it carefully avoided the darker aspects of the mystery. After Natalie's passing, Wagner raised Natasha as his own. Her biological father, Richard Gregson, agreed that staying with Wagner was in her best interest. For Natasha, Wagner wasn't just a stepfather, he was the only father figure she truly knew. This bond made it clear why she would want to protect him. But it also raised questions. Could her loyalty have clouded her judgment? Or did she truly believe he was innocent? But the biggest question remains: why has Wagner finally chosen to speak now? For years, Robert Wagner avoided the hard questions. He dodged interviews, dismissed speculation, and refused to engage with the endless theories about Natalie Wood's death. But now, at 93, the man at the center of Hollywood's greatest mystery is finally speaking out. His most recent public statements have reignited the debate. Whether it was a moment of reflection or a last-ditch attempt to reclaim his legacy, his words carry more weight than ever. In interviews and social media posts, Wagner insists on the same story he's held for decades, that he had nothing to do with Natalie's death. But the public isn't satisfied. Why now? Why break his silence after so many years of avoiding the subject? The timing is impossible to ignore. At his age, Wagner knows his time is running out. If he truly had nothing to hide, why didn't he open up sooner? And if he does have something to confess, why wait until now? His statements have been carefully worded. He expresses sorrow, speaks about how much he loved Natalie and reflects on the life they shared. But even now, he refuses to directly address the inconsistencies. The bruises on Natalie's body, the delayed search, and Captain Dennis Daven's confession that Wagner pressured him to lie. Instead, he focuses on his career, his love for his family, and his gratitude for the life he's lived. Public reaction has been split down the middle. Some see an old man finally opening up, showing the world a more vulnerable side of himself. Others see a master manipulator, once again shaping the narrative to protect himself. The media is relentless, dissecting every word, every pause, every moment where he chooses not to say too much. But does this bring any real closure? The people who have spent decades searching for answers aren't convinced. Wagner may be speaking, but he isn't saying anything new. He is still refusing to acknowledge that he was declared a person of interest in 2018. He isn't addressing why witnesses heard a woman screaming for help that night. And most importantly, he isn't explaining why Natalie, a woman terrified of deep water, would have gotten into a dinghy alone. At 93, Robert Wagner's voice is louder than ever, but the truth is still buried beneath decades of silence and doubt. Even as Wagner speaks, many still speculate about what truly happened that night. Decades have passed, but the mystery of Natalie Wood's death refuses to fade. Despite official rulings, doubts still linger, and alternative theories continue to emerge. Was it truly an accident? Or was something far more sinister at play? One of the most persistent questions is how Natalie, a woman terrified of deep water, would have willingly left the yacht in the middle of the night. Did she slip? Did she fall? Or was she pushed? The bruises found on her body suggest a struggle, yet no one on board admitted to witnessing one. Neighbors on a nearby boat swore they heard a woman screaming for help, but no one responded. How does that align with the official story? Forensic experts and legal analysts have re-examined the case multiple times. In 2011, authorities changed Natalie's death certificate from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors, a shocking shift that signaled there was more to the story. Experts pointed out that Natalie's injuries were inconsistent with a simple fall. Some believe she had been pushed or thrown into the water, possibly after a violent confrontation. Captain Dennis Devin's confession only added fuel to the fire, as he later claimed that Wagner had deliberately delayed the search for Natalie, buying himself time before authorities got involved. So, could Wagner still face legal action? At 93, the odds are slim. Despite being labeled a person of interest in 2018, no formal charges were ever brought against him. There is no smoking gun, no undeniable proof that could lead to a conviction. Without new evidence, the case remains frustratingly stagnant. The law may never hold Wagner accountable, but the court of public opinion remains divided. The legacies of Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner stand in stark contrast. Natalie is remembered as a Hollywood icon, a beloved actress who left behind an unforgettable filmography, but her tragic death has forever overshadowed her achievements. Instead of celebrating her talent, people still argue over the circumstances of her final night. Meanwhile, Wagner's legacy is complicated. He is still seen as a charming leading man, a figure from Hollywood's golden age, but that image is now stained by suspicion. So, is the mystery finally solved, or will it haunt history forever? Wagner has spoken, but his words raise more questions than they answer. He maintains his innocence, yet critical details remain unexplained. Theories will continue to spread, the whispers will never stop, and the truth, whatever it may be, remains locked in the past. At 93, Robert Wagner speaks, but is it enough to end the speculation? If you like this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and share your feedback in the comments section.